Today I'm sitting at my desk because I want to sit in front of the computer today. I want to show you some things with regards to a question that I was asked. And here's the question, or really the statement, and it's regarding Matthew 8:29. Modern versions leave out the most crucial word denoting Jesus, thou, Son of God. The verse in the modern versions doesn't sound right, like it's missing the fullness of its rendering. And this person goes on to say, like the devil doesn't want you to make a connection with the Son of God being Jesus in its entirety. So many subtle deficiencies and deletions. He goes on to say the King James Bible is your only reliable source of truth. Get back to it. I want to dig into that today, and I want to show you that even though that's what I was taught, that's what I believed for years, it only took just a few minutes of looking it up to see that it's just not the case. And so I want to teach you today about this particular variant in Matthew 8:29, why there is a difference between the King James Version and modern English versions. It's going to be quite an interesting study. I hope you'll stick with me. It won't take us long, and we'll have some fun here. So what I'm going to do is share my screen with you. Let's go over to Logos. Let's first look at it in the King James, and right here is our verse, Matthew 8, verse 29, or the phrase that we're going to be discussing is right here. It says, "And behold, they cried out, saying, What have we to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God? Art thou come hither to torment us before the time?" And the statement by this person is that Matthew 8:29 just doesn't sound right in modern versions. Well, let's see what it looks like in modern versions. So if we compare, and here's just a couple versions, the King James, obviously, Jesus, thou Son of God. When we look at it in the LSB, it says, "What have we to do with you, Son of God?" So Jesus, thou is missing here. In the ESV, again, "O Son of God," instead. So Jesus is not specifically stated here. In the NASB, Son of God, Jesus is not there. In the New King James, interesting. Jesus, you Son of God. Well, why is it in the New King James and the King James, but it's not in the others? Well, the reason for that is the New King James uses the same underlying Greek text that the King James does. And I'll show you that. If we look that up, and if we grab Stephanus 1550, this is a Textus Receptus that the King James translators would have used and had access to along with Beza's. So if we look at verse 29 right here, we will see, here's the verse. What we're looking at in particular is Jesu hui tu Theo. Jesu hui tu Theo. And so Jesus, Son of God. It doesn't say Jesus, the Son of God. It says Jesus, Son of God. So we see that that's why the King James and the New King James has Jesus, Son of God, or thou Son of God, or you Son of God. But why do the others not? Well, the others are based on what is called the modern eclectic text, or the critical text. So if we pull up the Nestle Aland here, and we look, I've already got it highlighted, we'll see that here we have soi, hui, tu, theo, and soi is the second person personal singular pronoun, personal pronoun for, that means you. What we have here, though, is directly hui tu theo, Son of God. This is in what's known as the vocative case. So this is a statement directly to this individual. This is a case that was... It is believed that it was going out of use during the time of Koine Greek, so a lot of times you'll just see the nominative case used instead of the vocative, but here we have this E, this epsilon on the end of hui that tells us that this is a direct statement to this person. But if you notice here in the Greek, this marker that tells us that there is a variant here. So if we go over to verse 29 in the critical apparatus that is associated with the Nestle Aland 28th edition, we'll see that there is Jesu, and it is in a few manuscripts. Actually, it's in quite a few, including the majority text. In particular, there's a couple that there's a couple really important ones that it is in, and one of those Codex C, which is Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus, which is a very important codex from the 5th century or from the 400s that has this word Yesu, has Jesus in it. Another one is Codex W, which is one of my favorite codexes, by the way. It's Codex Washingtonianus, and this is part of the Freer collection in Washington, D.C. It's actually held at one of the Smithsonian buildings. You'll notice that it's also missing. If we come down here and we see this this line here, this tells us that it is missing, and also we see the TXT, which tells us that this is the selected text for the reading that we have here. So if you notice over here, Yesu is in quite a few manuscripts, including the majority text, but it is not in Aleph, B, or it's not in an original reading of Ephraemi Rescriptus. So this is in what's known as a corrector up here. It's in a later edition or revision of the original manuscript. So it was not there originally, but it was added by a scribe later. It is original in W. Now, what we look at and see here, though, is pretty cool. So we see that it was not in the oldest manuscripts. And there's an argument to be made as to whether or not that is the most reliable way to determine variance. But it is what the Nestle-Aland and what the UBS chose to use for this particular reading based on that fact. Jesus is not there, but we still have the vocative or the directly speaking to, directly addressing the Son of God or addressing Son of God. This is why you don't have Jesus, but you still have Son of God in the modern English versions, sans the New King James and others that are based on the same underlying Greek text, or TR, if you will, of the King James Version. Let me take you back to what the person who made this comment said. He said, the verse in the modern versions don't sound right, like it's missing the fullness of its rendering, like the devil doesn't want to make a connection with the Son of God being Jesus. And then it goes on to say so many subtle deficiencies and deletions. The King James Bible is your only reliable source of truth. Get back to it. This is common between the older manuscripts, what are sometimes called the Alexandrian texts, but there is no Alexandrian text. It's an Alexandrian text type, and what are known as the Byzantine text type. So the difference is that the Alexandrian text types, like Aleph and B and C and W, they're going to be uncials or majuscule text. That means they're all capital letters, no spacing. You know what? Let me show you one. Let me just do that. This will work well. In fact, I'll show you Sinaiticus, which is a great manuscript to look at here for this. It is available online. Anyone can go and look at this. I pulled it up to Matthew chapter 8, verse 29. Let me zoom in here and I'll show you where this variant is, where Matthew 8:29 is in this particular verse. And I got to be careful not to click anywhere but on the text here, or on the, I don't want to click on the text because it's a very well done site, even though it's not the prettiest thing in the world. So what we're looking at in Matthew 8:29 is actually found right here. Here's the soy. So here is the second person personal pronoun. And then we have hui. There's the upsilon, the iota, the epsilon, and then tu, theu. There's only two letters here. There's a theta and there's an upsilon, but there's a line across the top of it. This is what's known as a nomina sacra or a nomina divina, either a divine name or a sacred name. And in the uncials, in the majuscule texts, in the ones that look like this, where it's all capital letters, no spacing, no punctuation here, this is common when a divine name such as Jesus or God or Christ or Lord is in the text here referring to the Lord Jesus or referring to God. You'll see this shortened form. So instead of the theta, omicron, upsilon here and having it fully spelled out, you'll see it abbreviated with two letters and a line across it. And so that's what we see here. And this is common of what is known as the Alexandrian text type. The Alexandrian text type is usually less wordy than the Byzantine text type. That's especially the case when it comes to names and titles for the Lord. The wild assertion that the devil just doesn't want to make a connection with the Son of God being Jesus in its entirety, and that new versions have taken this out and removed it from the text to water down the deity of Christ. But is that true? Let's see what modern versions have to say about this. So let me flip back over to Logos here, and let's dig in. I'm going to close this out. And what I want to do is pull up a search window. And let's pick a Look, everybody criticizes the NIV as one of the world's worst. And so let's just take a look at some of those. And here's what it looks like in the NIV for Matthew 8:29. What do you want with us, Son of God? They shouted. Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time? So there, Jesus is mentioned there. So obviously the NIV just waters down the deity of Christ. It's a tool of Satan to take away the deity, right? Well, let's see. Let's do a search. And what I want to do is I want to search within the NIV, and I want to search for verses that have Jesus and then the phrase Son of God. And let's see what happens. Well, we have 24 results in 12 verses. Really, we have 12 verses to look through. The first one is really moot. It's not really relevant. But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, so this is about his trial. But if we look at the following verses, and really beginning in Mark 1, these next 10 verses are key. Let's look and see if the NIV, as an Alexandrian text type, critical text example, or modern English version, let's see if it really takes away the deity of Christ in disassociating Jesus from being the Son of God. Well, in Mark 1:1, the beginning of the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. That is very wordy. And so let's pull this up. King James Version, Jesus, thou Son of God. This is the big deal. King James says, Jesus, thou Son of God. The NIV in that particular verse just says, Son of God. Let's look at all of it. Let's look and see, did they really remove the deity of Christ or disassociate Jesus from being the Son of God? In Mark 1:1, nope, it's there. Mark 15:39, and when the centurion who stood in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, surely this man was the Son of God. So again, there's Jesus, this man clearly being identified as the Son of God. John 20, verse 31. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. You can tell I'm not used to reading from the NIV. But there, Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. Acts 9:20, and at once he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God. Romans, and remember now, I'm reading from the NIV right here. Romans 1:4, and who through the Spirit of holiness was anointed the Son of God, empowered by his resurrection from the dead. Who is that? Who is the Son of God? Jesus Christ our Lord. 2 Corinthians 1:19, for the Son of God, Jesus Christ, who was preached among you by us, by me and Silas, Timothy, and Timothy was not yes and no, but in him that has always been yes. Hebrews 4:14, therefore, since we have a great high priest who was ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. 3 more verses. 1 John 4:15. If anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in them and they in God. 1 John 5:5. Again, look at the end of it. Who is it that overcomes the world? Only the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. Wow. It's over and over again. 1 John 5:20, lastly. We know also that the Son of God has come and has given us understanding, so that we may know him who is true. And we are in him who is true by being in his Son, Jesus Christ. He is the true God and eternal life. Let me pull back over here so you can look at me for just a moment, and let's wrap this up. In every one of these verses in the NIV, of which I am not particularly a fan, it associates Jesus as the Son of God. The devil and his pawns and evil translators succeeded in confusing people in modern versions so that nobody would know that Jesus is the Son of God. If that was their attempt, they failed miserably. They were complete idiots in their work and accomplished nothing, because in these 11 verses or 10 verses that we looked at, Jesus is clearly identified as being the Son of God. The truth is, the translators of these modern versions did believe in the deity of Christ. It's all throughout these modern English versions. There are legitimate reasons why there are different readings across translations, and intellectual honesty in approaching these variants is healthy and it's rewarding, as you come to the realization that the King James Version is not the only faithful translation of the Scriptures in English. Now, that's going to make some of you upset, but I have just shown you that what you have been taught about these modern versions, and especially the NIV, we've all heard it's the NIV. The NIV is horrible. And you can tell I'm not comfortable or not used to reading from it. I mean, I struggled reading through it. It's just not, I don't like a word for, sorry, I don't like a phrase for phrase or a thought for thought translation. Give me a formal equivalent any day. Even in that version, I could have done the same thing with the NLT. I could have probably, I don't know, I could have probably come very close to the same result with the Message. This is not something that is a grand conspiracy. This is not Gail Ripplinger type stuff going on. This is just simple translation differences based on the readings of the Greek manuscripts that they worked with and worked from, and making textual critical decisions. Now, wait a minute, before you go, well, that's the problem, is they made textual critical decisions. I would remind you that so did the King James translators, as they had multiple English versions, as they had multiple Greek printed editions in front of them, as they had Latin beside on the page beside of the Greek in those printed manuscripts with them, as they had the Latin Vulgate. They had to make the same kinds of decisions that modern translators did. And so it's not like there was a single source that came down from heaven that God said, "Oh, and here it is," and they just simply translated that into English. It's not the case at all. They made textual critical decisions just like modern translators had to do as well. What I wanted you to see here in this is that there is a legitimate reason why the name Jesus is missing from Matthew 8:29, and it is not because the deity of Christ has been somehow ripped out of these modern versions. And as I've shown you in several places in the NIV, Jesus is the Son of God. The same doctrine is taught in these same verses. Hope that helps, and I hope that makes some sense, and I hope you learned a little something, even if it is something that you didn't want to learn today. Bye-bye.